The collar felt like a noose tightening around his neck, and Pike Edwards would have rather faced down a grizzly bear with his bare hands than spend another minute trapped in this wool prison they called a suit. He stood at the altar of the small church in Superior, Arizona, sweating through layers of unfamiliar fabric, his calloused fingers tugging at the stiff white collar that threatened to strangle him with every breath he took. The June heat of 1878 pressed through the church windows like the devil's own breath, making the situation even more unbearable. Pike had spent 32 years of his life in the mountains and valleys of the Arizona Territory, wearing buckskin that moved with his body like a second skin, that breathed with the wind and protected him from thorns and branches without complaint. This suit, this ridiculous costume that the pastor's wife had insisted he wear, felt like betrayal against everything he had ever known. But then the church doors opened, and Willow Winters stepped into the afternoon light filtering through the doorway, and Pike forgot all about the itching, the heat, and the suffocating collar. She wore a dress of cream-colored lace that her sister had sewn over the past 3 months, working by candlelight in the evenings after finishing her work at the boarding house. The fabric caught the light and seemed to glow, making Willow look like something from a dream Pike never knew he was allowed to have. Her auburn hair, usually tied back in a practical braid, had been arranged in soft waves that framed her face, with small white flowers tucked into the curls. Her green eyes, the color of pine needles after a rain, found his across the length of the church, and she smiled. That smile nearly brought Pike to his knees right there in front of God and the 47 people who had crowded into the wooden building to witness their union. It had been exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 16 days since Willow had stumbled into his camp in the Superstition Mountains, half dead from thirst and exhaustion, her dress torn and her face sunburned to the point of blistering. Pike had been checking his trap lines, moving through the rocky terrain with the silent efficiency of a man who had spent more time with animals than people, when he heard the sound that changed his life forever. It was a whimper, soft and desperate, coming from behind a cluster of palo verde trees. Pike had approached with caution, his rifle ready, expecting to find an injured animal. Instead, he found a woman collapsed against a rock, her lips cracked and bleeding, her breathing shallow. She wore the remnants of what had once been a fine traveling dress, now reduced to tatters. Her hands were scraped raw, and her leather boots had split at the seams. He had never moved faster in his life. Within seconds, Pike had his canteen pressed to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand, murmuring words of reassurance in a voice rusty from disuse. "Easy now, easy. Small sips. You are going to be fine, I have got you." Her eyes had fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever, and she had looked at him like he was an angel descended from heaven instead of a rough mountain man who had not trimmed his beard in 6 months or cut his dark brown hair in over a year. "Please," she had whispered, her voice barely audible. "My father, the wagon, they took him." Those words had ignited something in Pike's chest that he had thought long dead: anger, purpose, the need to protect. He had carried Willow back to his camp, all 5 feet and 6 inches of her weighing almost nothing in his arms, her head resting against his broad chest as he navigated the treacherous mountain paths with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. His camp was modest, consisting of a lean-to shelter he had built against a rock face, a fire pit surrounded by stones, and his supplies stored in waterproof bags hung from tree branches to keep them safe from animals. Pike had laid her gently on his bedroll, the only soft surface available, and set about tending to her injuries. He cleaned the cuts on her hands and feet with water he had boiled, applied a salve he made from desert plants that had healing properties, and wrapped them in strips of clean cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. He dampened another cloth and placed it on her forehead to bring down her fever, then prepared a broth from dried meat and wild herbs. For 3 days, Willow drifted in and out of consciousness, while Pike kept constant watch over her. He fed her broth spoonful by spoonful when she could swallow, changed the dressings on her wounds, and kept her sheltered from the harsh desert sun. During those 3 days, he learned the sound of her breathing, the way she murmured in her sleep, and the exact shade of green her eyes became when fever made them glassy. On the 4th day, she woke fully, her fever broken, and the first words out of her mouth were, "My father. We have to find my father." Pike had been skinning a rabbit for their dinner, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, but he stopped at her words and turned to face her. "Tell me what happened." Willow struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her blistered feet. Pike crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and eased her back down with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Rest. You can talk while lying down." She had looked up at him then, really looked at him, taking in his sun-darkened skin, the muscles that corded his arms and shoulders from years of hard living, the long hair that fell past his collar, and the dark eyes that held both wariness and unexpected kindness. "Who are you?" "Pike Edwards. I trap and hunt in these mountains. Been doing it for near about 15 years now." He settled back on his heels, maintaining a respectful distance. "Your turn." "Willow Winters. My father and I were traveling from Texas to California. He had business in San Francisco, and I was accompanying him because my mother passed 2 years ago, and he did not want to leave me alone." Her voice caught on the words, but she pushed forward. "We hired a guide in Tucson, along with 2 men who were supposed to protect us." 3 days into the journey, they revealed their true intentions. They wanted the money my father was carrying, nearly $3,000 for his business venture. Pike's jaw tightened. $3,000 was enough to make men do terrible things. There was a fight. "My father told me to run, so I did. I ran into the desert like a coward while they dragged him away." Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I ran until I could not run anymore, and then I walked. I thought I was going to die out there. I wanted to die because I had left him." "You did what he told you to do," Pike said firmly. "You survived. That is not cowardly, that is smart." He stood, his mind already working through the logistics. "How long ago did this happen?" "I do not know. Days. I lost track of time." Too long, Pike thought, but he did not say it aloud. The chances of her father still being alive decreased with every passing hour, but he had learned long ago that hope was sometimes all a person had to hold on to. "Can you describe the men? The location of the attack?" Willow described the 3 men in detail. One of them with a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw, another missing 2 fingers on his right hand, and the guide who had organized the whole thing, a man with silver hair and a gold tooth. She remembered landmarks near where they had been attacked, a formation of rocks that looked like a crouching cat and a dead saguaro cactus split by lightning. Pike knew the area. It was a day's hard ride from his camp. "I will find him," Pike said, and Willow heard the absolute certainty in his voice. "Take me with you." "No, you are in no condition to travel. He is my father." Willow pushed herself up to sitting despite the pain, her eyes blazing with determination. "I will not stay here while you risk your life for him. Either you take me with you, or I will follow on my own the moment you leave." Pike studied her for a long moment, recognizing the steel beneath her fragile appearance. She reminded him of the desert flowers that bloomed after rain, delicate in appearance but tough enough to survive in the harshest conditions. You will do exactly as I say. No arguments. Agreed. They had left at dawn the next morning, Willow riding Pike's horse while he walked alongside, setting a pace that was quick, but would not exhaust her. She wore a spare set of his clothes, the buckskin pants and shirt hanging loose on her smaller frame but far more practical than her ruined dress. Pike had fashioned makeshift boots for her from deer hide, wrapping them carefully around her healing feet. As they traveled, Pike taught her things without seeming to teach, pointing out which plants held water, which animal tracks meant danger, how to read the sky for coming weather. Willow absorbed everything like parched earth soaking up rain, asking questions that showed a sharp intelligence Pike had not expected. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked on the second day of their journey. Pike was silent for so long that Willow thought he would not answer. Finally, he said, "Came out here when I was 17. My father was a mean drunk who liked to use his fists. My mother died when I was young and I had no siblings. One day, I just walked away from our farm in Missouri and kept walking until I found a place where his anger could not reach me. I am sorry. Do not be. Best decision I ever made." He glanced up at her, shading his eyes against the sun. "These mountains do not lie. They do not pretend to be something they are not. An animal will attack you because it is hungry or protecting its young, not because it drank too much whiskey and decided it hated the world. There is honesty in that. It sounds lonely. Loneliness is just another condition of living. You get used to it." But even as he said the words, Pike wondered if they were still true. Having Willow in his camp, hearing her voice, watching her move through his space, had awakened something he had thought permanently dormant. The silence he returned to each evening suddenly seemed heavier, emptier. They found her father on the third day. The abandoned mine shaft was hidden in a narrow canyon, the kind of place that would be easy to miss if you did not know what to look for. Pike had tracked the men there by following signs invisible to Willow's untrained eyes. Broken twigs that pointed like arrows, disturbed soil, the faint remains of a campfire. He made Willow stay behind a large boulder while he approached, his rifle ready, his body moving with the fluid silence of a hunting cat. But when he peered into the mine shaft, he found only one man, bound and gagged but alive. William Winters was in bad shape, dehydrated and beaten, but his eyes lit up with recognition and hope when he saw his daughter running toward him despite Pike's orders to stay put. Willow threw her arms around her father, sobbing his name over and over while Pike cut through the ropes that bound him. "The men who took you?" Pike asked. William's voice was rough from disuse. "Left yesterday morning. They argued about what to do with me. The one with the scar wanted to kill me, but the guide convinced them I was worth more alive as a hostage in case anyone came looking. They were heading toward the Mexican border." Pike helped William to his feet, supporting the older man's weight. "Can you ride? I will crawl if I have to." Getting William back to civilization became Pike's sole focus for the next week. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest and allow William to regain his strength. Pike hunted fresh game, prepared nourishing meals, and tended to William's injuries with the same care he had shown Willow. During those long days of travel, Pike got to know the man whose daughter had crashed into his solitary life like a meteor. William Winters was 53 years old, a businessman who had built a successful freight company in San Antonio through hard work and honest dealing. He was educated, well-spoken, and possessed a dry wit that emerged as his health improved. He also clearly adored his daughter, and the feeling was mutual. "You saved both our lives," William said one evening as they sat around the campfire. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Pike shook his head. "No debt. Any decent person would have done the same." Any decent person, perhaps, but not many men would have the skill to track 3 dangerous criminals through the desert and find a hidden mine shaft in this wilderness. William studied Pike across the fire. "You are an interesting man, Pike Edwards." They brought William to Superior, a small mining town that had sprung up in the Pinal Mountains. The town doctor, a gruff man named Henderson, examined William and declared that he would make a full recovery with rest and proper food. William took a room at the boarding house, and Willow stayed to care for him. Pike told himself he would leave as soon as he knew they were settled safely. He had already spent more time away from his trap lines than he could afford. Winter would come, and he needed to prepare. But he found excuses to stay. He needed supplies from the general store. His horse needed new shoes. The boarding house made decent coffee, and it had been a long time since he had tasted coffee that did not come from his battered tin pot. The truth was, he could not bring himself to leave Willow. She had gotten under his skin in a way he did not fully understand. When he closed his eyes, he saw her smile. When he sat alone at his campfire, he heard her voice asking questions about the desert. When he woke in the morning, he reached for her before remembering she was not there. It was terrifying. Willow felt the same pull, though she tried to deny it. She told herself she was grateful to Pike, nothing more. He had saved her life and her father's life, and gratitude was a natural response. The fact that her heart raced when she saw him walking down the street, or that she found excuses to visit the livery stable where he was boarding his horse, or that she lay awake at night thinking about the gentleness of his hands when he had tended her wounds, all of that was just leftover emotion from their intense experience. But she was lying to herself, and she knew it. "He is going to leave," she confided to Margaret Chen, the young woman who owned the boarding house. Margaret was 26, widowed 2 years earlier when her husband died in a mining accident, and she had become Willow's first real friend in Superior. "Then tell him not to," Margaret said practically. She was kneading bread dough with efficient movements, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I cannot do that. I have no right." "Why not? You clearly have feelings for him, and unless I am completely blind, which I am not, he has feelings for you." Willow sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "He is a mountain man, Margaret. He has lived alone for 15 years because he prefers it that way. What could I possibly offer him that would compare to the freedom and peace he has in those mountains?" Margaret punched down the dough with more force than necessary. "Yourself. You could offer him yourself, which, in my opinion, is worth more than all the mountains in the territory." She paused, her expression softening. "Do you love him?" The question hung in the air between them. Willow had been avoiding it, pushing it away every time it surfaced in her mind. But sitting there in Margaret's warm kitchen, with the smell of rising bread and the sound of miners passing by on the street outside, she could not avoid it anymore. "Yes," she whispered, "I love him." "Then fight for him." But before Willow could fight for anything, fate intervened in the form of the 3 men who had kidnapped her father. They rode into Superior on a hot July afternoon, dusty and mean-looking, clearly not expecting to find their escaped hostage alive and well. William spotted them first from the window of his boarding house room and immediately sent word to the sheriff. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a capable man in his late 40s who had kept the peace in Superior for the past 5 years. He organized a group of deputies and confronted the men outside the saloon. The guide with the silver hair and gold tooth reached for his gun. The shootout lasted less than 2 minutes but felt like an eternity to Willow, who watched from the boarding house window with her heart in her throat. When the gunfire stopped, one of the kidnappers was dead, shot by the sheriff. The other 2, including the guide, were wounded and captured. Pike had been at the livery stable when the shooting started, and he ran toward the sound with his rifle in hand, his instincts screaming at him to protect Willow and William. He arrived to find the situation already under control, but his eyes immediately sought out Willow in the boarding house window. Their gazes locked across the dusty street, and in that moment, both of them understood the truth they had been dancing around. Life was too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending they did not need each other. Pike crossed the street with long strides, pushed through the door of the boarding house, and climbed the stairs to where Willow stood waiting. He stopped in front of her, this big, rough mountain man with his long hair and buckskin clothes, and said the most important words of his life. "I cannot leave you." Willow reached up and touched his bearded face with trembling fingers. "Then do not." He kissed her there in the boarding house hallway, with Margaret watching from the kitchen doorway and grinning like a fool. It was Pike's first kiss in over a decade, and it was clumsy and desperate and perfect. Willow tasted like tea and hope, and Pike thought he might have finally found something worth more than his solitude. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Pike rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know how to do this. I have been alone for so long." "Then we will figure it out together." And they did, though it was not always easy. Pike rented a small house on the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with 2 rooms and a porch that looked out toward the mountains. It was a compromise between his need for space and his desire to be near Willow. He took work as a guide and hunter, selling game to the boarding house and other businesses in town, using skills he had honed over 15 years to make a living. Living in town was an adjustment that nearly broke him some days. The noise of people, the constant social interactions, the expectations of polite society, all of it chafed against Pike's nature like rough wool against sunburned skin. He missed the silence of the mountains, the freedom to go days without speaking, the simplicity of a life governed by survival rather than social niceties. But then Willow would appear at his door with a basket of food, or she would suggest a walk to the edge of town where they could watch the sunset, or she would simply sit beside him on the porch in comfortable silence, and Pike would remember why he had stayed. Willow worked at the boarding house alongside Margaret, learning to cook and clean and manage the steady stream of miners and travelers who needed lodging. It was hard work, but she discovered she was good at it, and she enjoyed the independence that came with earning her own money. William stayed in Superior as well, abandoning his plans to continue to California. He had come too close to death to risk another journey through dangerous territory, and besides, he had grown fond of the small mining town and the people in it. He opened a small freight office, arranging shipments of supplies to the mines and ore back to the larger cities. Business was steady, and he found a sense of purpose in the work. He also gave his blessing to the relationship developing between his daughter and the mountain man who had saved them both, though he pulled Pike aside one evening for a conversation. "My daughter is everything to me," William said. They were sitting on Pike's porch, drinking whiskey and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "If you hurt her, I will find a way to make you regret it, even though you could probably snap me in half with one hand." Pike appreciated the honesty. "I would let you, but I will not hurt her." "I would sooner cut off my own arm." "I believe you." William took a sip of his whiskey. "But I have to ask, are you happy here? You are a man who needs wide, open spaces and freedom. This town, this life, it must feel like a cage sometimes." Pike considered the question carefully. "It does. Some days I wake up and the walls feel like they are closing in. I get an itch between my shoulder blades, and I know it is the urge to head back to the mountains and not come back. But then I think about Willow, and the itch goes away. Or maybe it does not go away, but it stops mattering as much." Pike turned the whiskey glass in his hands. I spent 15 years in those mountains, William. I thought I was free, but I was really just alone. There is a difference. William nodded slowly. And now? Now I am figuring out what it means to belong somewhere. To belong to someone. It is harder than tracking a mountain lion in a snowstorm, but it is worth it. As summer turned to fall, Pike and Willow's relationship deepened. They stole moments together whenever they could, walking through the desert in the early morning before the heat became unbearable, sitting together in the church on Sundays, sharing meals at the boarding house with Margaret and William. Pike taught Willow to shoot, taking her out to a secluded canyon where the sound would not disturb anyone. He placed the rifle in her hands, positioned her body, and guided her through the mechanics of aiming and firing. She was a quick study, hitting the target on her third try. "Why do I need to know this?" she asked, lowering the rifle. "Because I will not always be there to protect you. You need to be able to protect yourself." Willow turned to face him fully. "Do you plan on going somewhere?" Pike pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No. But the world is unpredictable, and I have seen too many people suffer because they were not prepared. I want you to be prepared." She understood what he was not saying, the fears that lived beneath his calm exterior, the knowledge that came from a hard life that nothing was guaranteed. She stood on her toes and kissed him softly. "Teach me everything." So he did. He taught her to track animals, to find water, to read the signs of weather in the clouds. He taught her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to start a fire with flint and steel, how to move quietly through brush. Willow absorbed it all with the same eagerness she had shown during their journey to find her father. In return, Willow taught Pike the social graces he had forgotten or never learned. She showed him how to make small talk with the shopkeepers, how to accept invitations to dinner parties without looking like he wanted to bolt, how to dance. The dancing lessons took place in his small house, with Willow humming a waltz while Pike tried to remember the steps and not crush her toes with his boots. "You are terrible at this," she said, laughing as he stumbled for the third time. "I am aware." But he kept trying because her laughter was worth any amount of embarrassment. The people of Superior gradually accepted Pike as one of their own. The miners respected his strength and his skills. The shopkeepers appreciated his business. The women of the town initially viewed him with suspicion, this wild man who had appeared out of the desert. But Willow's obvious happiness and William's endorsement went a long way toward changing their minds. Margaret became their fiercest advocate, declaring to anyone who would listen that Pike Edwards was the finest man in the territory and Willow was lucky to have him, though it was equally true that Pike was lucky to have Willow. As winter approached, Pike felt the familiar restlessness that came with changing seasons. His body was attuned to the rhythms of nature, and it expected to be preparing for winter in the mountains, checking trap lines, hunting and preserving meat, ensuring his shelter was secure against coming storms. Instead, he was in a town, surrounded by people, wearing boots that felt too tight and shirts that restricted his movement. The disconnect between what his body expected and where he actually was created a low-level anxiety that hummed beneath his skin like an infection. Willow noticed his increased tension, the way his jaw clenched when the street got too crowded, the distant look in his eyes when he thought she was not watching. She found him one evening sitting on his porch, staring toward the mountains with an expression of such longing that it broke her heart. "You should go," she said softly, sitting beside him. Pike turned to her, confused. "What? To the mountains? You should go. Spend some time in your camp, check your trap lines, do whatever it is you need to do." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I can see how much you need it. You are like a wild animal in a cage, and it is cruel of me to keep you here. You are not keeping me anywhere. I choose to be here. I know, but choice does not erase need. Willow squeezed his hand. Go for a week or two. Clear your head. Remember who you are without all this noise and expectation. Then come back to me. Pike studied her face, looking for signs of resentment or anger, but found only understanding and love. I will miss you every minute. Good. I would be offended if you did not. He left 3 days later, riding toward the Superstition Mountains with a sense of relief so profound, it almost felt like guilt. But as the town disappeared behind him, and the familiar landscape of rock and desert opened up before him, Pike felt his shoulders relax and his breathing deepen. His camp was exactly as he had left it, the lean-to shelter still standing, his cached supplies untouched. He spent the first day simply existing in the silence, relearning the sounds of wind through rocks and the calls of birds. He checked his trap lines, repaired what needed repairing, and hunted a deer that would provide meat for the next several days. But something was different. The solitude that had once felt like freedom now felt merely empty. He found himself talking to Willow as if she were there, pointing out animal tracks and interesting rock formations, telling her stories about his early days in the mountains. At night, he lay in his bedroll and stared at the stars, thinking about her smile and the sound of her laughter. On the 5th day, Pike admitted the truth to himself. These mountains, this life, they were part of who he was, but they were no longer all of who he was. Willow had changed him, opened him up to the possibility that he could be both the solitary mountain man and the man who belonged to someone. The two identities did not have to be mutually exclusive. He returned to Superior after 8 days, riding into town at sunset with his saddlebags full of pelts and preserved meat. Willow was sitting on his porch, waiting for him as if she had known the exact moment he would arrive. She stood as he dismounted, and they met halfway, coming together in an embrace that felt like coming home. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked against his chest. "Yes, I found that I need you more than I need the silence." He pulled back to look at her face. "But I also need to not lose myself completely. I need to find a balance. Then we will find it together." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Pike established a pattern of spending 1 week out of every month in the mountains, maintaining his trap lines and preserving his connection to the wild. Willow sometimes went with him, learning to love the harsh beauty of the desert landscape and the peace that came with solitude. Other times, she stayed in town, tending to her work and giving Pike the space he needed. It was not perfect, and there were difficult moments. There were nights when Pike woke from nightmares about his father, his body tense with old fears. There were days when Willow felt the weight of losing her mother and clung to her father with desperate need. There were arguments about money and future plans, and the small frustrations that come with building a life together. But they worked through each challenge, learning each other's rhythms and triggers, discovering what helped and what hurt. Pike learned to talk about his feelings instead of retreating into silence. Willow learned to ask for what she needed instead of assuming Pike should know. They learned to fight fair and forgive quickly. Christmas came, and with it, a transformation in Pike that surprised everyone, including himself. He had never celebrated the holiday, seeing it as a frivolous town custom that had no place in his mountain life. But Willow loved Christmas, and so Pike found himself helping to decorate the boarding house with pine branches and ribbons, attending the church service on Christmas Eve, and even participating in the gift exchange. He gave Willow a necklace he had made himself, small stones polished smooth by river water and strung on a leather cord. Each stone was different, collected from places that held meaning in their relationship. The canyon where he had taught her to shoot, the trail where they had walked on their first journey together, the creek near his mountain camp where they had sat watching deer drink at sunset. Willow cried when she saw it, understanding the significance of each carefully chosen stone. Her gift to him was a new buckskin shirt, sewn by her own hands over many secret evenings. It fit him perfectly, moving with his body in a way store-bought clothes never did, and when he put it on, he felt more like himself than he had in months. "You made this?" he asked, running his hands over the expert stitching. "Margaret helped with some of the technique, but yes, I made it." Willow smiled nervously. "I wanted you to have something that felt right, something that honored who you are." Pike pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he said, the words still new and strange in his mouth, but absolutely true. "I love you too." It was the first time either of them had said it aloud, though they had both felt it for months. The words hung in the air between them, powerful and binding, a promise of everything yet to come. On New Year's Day, 1879, Pike asked William for permission to marry Willow. They were in William's freight office, surrounded by ledgers and shipping manifests, and Pike was more nervous than he had ever been facing down a wild animal. "I know I am not what you probably imagined for your daughter," Pike said, standing stiffly in front of William's desk. "I am not educated or refined. I do not have much money or prospects for wealth. But I love her with everything I am, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it." William set down his pen and studied the younger man carefully. In the months since Pike had saved his life, William had watched him transform from a solitary mountain man into someone who was learning to be part of a community. It had not been easy for Pike, but he had done it because he loved Willow. That dedication spoke volumes about his character. "Do you know what Willow wants from life?" William asked. Pike nodded. "She wants a home, a family, a sense of belonging. She wants to build something lasting, something that will outlive us both. She wants children, at least 3. She wants to grow old watching sunsets and teaching her grandchildren about the desert." He paused. "She told me all of this on a night when we were talking about the future. And can you give her those things? I will die trying." William stood and extended his hand. "Then you have my blessing and my gratitude." Pike shook his hand, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, sir. Call me William. We are going to be family." Pike proposed to Willow that evening, taking her to the canyon where he had taught her to shoot. The sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of orange and red, and the desert was alive with the sounds of evening creatures emerging from their daytime shelters. He had rehearsed a speech, something about how she had changed his life and made him believe in possibilities he had never imagined. But when the moment came, all the pretty words fled, and he was left with only the raw truth. "Marry me," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I know I am not easy to live with, and I know I will probably spend the rest of my life figuring out how to be the man you deserve, but I want to try. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. So please, Willow Winters, will you marry me?" Willow was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He kissed her as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and in that moment, Pike Edwards felt something he had never felt in his entire life: complete and utter contentment. The wedding was set for June, giving them 6 months to prepare. In a town the size of Superior, a wedding was a significant event, and the entire community seemed determined to make it memorable. Margaret took charge of organizing the reception, which would be held at the boarding house. The pastor's wife, a formidable woman named Agnes, insisted on overseeing all the ceremonial details. The women of the town gathered to help sew Willow's wedding dress, each contributing stitches and well wishes. Pike's main contribution was supposed to be simply showing up, but Agnes had other ideas. She cornered him at the general store one afternoon in April with a determined expression that Pike had learned to recognize and dread. "You cannot get married in Buckskin," Agnes declared, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. Pike had been examining a new hunting knife, but he set it down carefully and turned to face her. "Why not?" "Because it is a wedding, Pike, not a hunting trip. You need to look proper and respectable." "I am proper and respectable in Buckskin." Agnes's expression softened slightly. "I know you are uncomfortable with the idea of dressing up. Margaret told me about your feelings on formal clothes, but this is Willow's wedding day, and she deserves to see you looking your best." Pike wanted to argue that he looked his best in the clothes that fit his life and his body, but he also understood the underlying message. This was not about him. This was about honoring Willow and showing the community that he took this commitment seriously. "Fine," he said, the word coming out more like a growl than agreement. "What do I need to do?" Thus began Pike's introduction to the torture device known as a formal suit. The tailor in Superior, a small, nervous man named Mr. Peterson, measured Pike for a suit with trembling hands, clearly intimidated by his client's size and reputation. Pike stood still and tried not to think about how much he hated every second of this process. The suit, when it was finally ready in late May, was made of dark gray wool that felt like punishment against Pike's skin. The collar was stiff and high, designed to strangle any man foolish enough to wear it. The jacket restricted his shoulder movement, making him feel confined and vulnerable. The pants were too tight in the thighs, and the boots pinched his feet. When Pike tried on the complete outfit for the first time, he caught sight of himself in Mr. Peterson's mirror and did not recognize the man staring back. He looked civilized, domesticated, nothing like the mountain man who had spent 15 years living wild and free. "You look very handsome," Mr. Peterson offered nervously. Pike grunted, tugging at the collar. "I look like a fraud." But he kept the suit and resigned himself to wearing it on the wedding day, because Willow deserved that sacrifice. She had given up her plans to travel to California, had adapted to life in a rough mining town, had learned to love the desert that had nearly killed her. The least he could do was wear uncomfortable clothes for a few hours. As the wedding date approached, Pike found himself experiencing an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel: fear. Not fear of marriage or commitment, those things felt right and inevitable, but fear that he would somehow fail at this new life he was building, that his nature would reassert itself, and he would wake up one day and leave, disappearing back into the mountains and abandoning Willow the way his father had abandoned his responsibilities. He confided these fears to William one evening as they sat on Pike's porch, drinking whiskey and watching the stars. "You think I am making a mistake?" Pike asked. "Trying to be something I am not?" William considered the question carefully. "I do not think you are trying to be something you are not. I think you are discovering that you are more than you thought you were." He paused. "You spent 15 years defining yourself by what you were running from: your father's violence, human cruelty, the pain of connection. Now you are defining yourself by what you are running toward: love, family, belonging. That is not a mistake. That is growth. What if I am too damaged? What if I hurt her without meaning to? Then you will apologize and do better next time. That is what marriage is, Pike. It is two imperfect people choosing each other every day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." William refilled their glasses. "My wife and I were married for 23 years before she died. We fought, we struggled, we hurt each other more times than I can count. But we also laughed together, built a life together, raised a daughter together. The good far outweighed the bad." Pike absorbed these words, letting them settle into the anxious places in his heart. "I wish I had known her. She would have liked you. She always said the measure of a man was not where he started but where he was willing to go." William raised his glass. "And you, Pike Edwards, have come a very long way." The night before the wedding, Pike could not sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of the entire community and make promises that would bind him for the rest of his life. The thought did not terrify him as much as he expected. Instead, he felt a strange sense of peace. He thought about Willow's laugh, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the strength in her hands from months of hard work, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him. He thought about the life they would build together, the children they would raise, the years of companionship and partnership that stretched ahead. At some point in the night, Pike drifted into sleep and dreamed of mountains and Willow's face and a future that felt both terrifying and wonderful. The morning of June 21, 1879, dawned clear and hot, with the sun beating down on Superior like a hammer on an anvil. Pike woke early, bathed in the creek behind his house, and trimmed his beard for the first time in months. He looked at his long hair, considered cutting it, then decided against it. Some changes were too much to ask. Getting into the suit was an ordeal. The collar fought him like a living thing. The jacket seemed to have shrunk since the last fitting. The boots were instruments of torture designed by someone who hated feet. By the time Pike was fully dressed, he was sweating and irritable and seriously considering running for the mountains. Then William knocked on his door, also dressed in a formal suit, and took one look at Pike's expression and laughed. "That bad?" William asked. "Worse. I feel like I am being slowly suffocated. Welcome to civilized society." William adjusted Pike's tie, which had somehow become crooked in the struggle. "But I promise you, when you see Willow walking down that aisle, you will forget all about the discomfort." They walked to the church together, arriving early as per Agnes's strict instructions. The small building had been decorated with desert flowers and ribbons, transforming the simple wooden structure into something beautiful. Chairs had been borrowed from the school and the boarding house to accommodate the guests, and someone had hung curtains to provide shade from the harsh sun. Pike took his place at the altar, next to Pastor Richards, a kind man in his 60s who had agreed to perform the ceremony. The church slowly filled with people, miners in their best clothes, women in colorful dresses, children squirming in their seats. Pike recognized most of them, people he had come to know over the past year, and their presence felt both comforting and overwhelming. Margaret arrived and gave Pike an encouraging smile before taking her place at the front. She would be standing up for Willow, just as William would be standing up for Pike. It was a small wedding party, but it felt right. Then the church doors opened, and Willow appeared, and William had been absolutely correct. Pike forgot about the itching collar, the tight jacket, the pinching boots. He forgot about everything except the woman walking toward him. Willow looked like something from a dream, ethereal and beautiful in her cream-lace dress, her auburn hair arranged in soft waves with white flowers tucked among the curls. But what struck Pike most was the expression on her face, pure joy and love and certainty. She was looking at him like he was everything she had ever wanted, and Pike felt his chest tighten with emotion. William walked Willow down the aisle, and when they reached the altar, he placed her hand in Pike's and whispered, "Take care of my girl." "Always," Pike whispered back. Pastor Richards began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage. Pike heard the words, but he was lost in Willow's eyes, those green eyes that had looked at him with trust even when she was half dead from thirst. that had seen past his rough exterior to the man beneath, that were now shining with unshed tears as she prepared to bind her life to his. When it came time for the vows, Pike spoke as clearly and firmly, his deep voice carrying through the church. I, Pike Edwards, take you, Willow Winters, to be my wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life. I promise to choose you every morning and come home to you every night. I promise to be worthy of the faith you have placed in me. Willow's vows were equally heartfelt. I, Willow Winters, take you, Pike Edwards, to be my husband. I promise to love you as you are, not as the world thinks you should be. I promise to give you freedom when you need it and anchor you when you need that instead. I promise to build a life with you that honors both the mountains and the town, both solitude and community. They exchanged simple gold bands that Pike had commissioned from the local blacksmith, and then Pastor Richards pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, he said with a smile. Pike cupped Willow's face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her gently, mindful of their audience but unable to hide the depth of his feeling. Willow kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment they were the only two people in the world. The church erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their community as husband and wife. Pike kept Willow's hand firmly in his as they walked back down the aisle, and despite the suit that itched and constricted, despite the crowd and the noise and the attention, Pike felt something he had never expected to feel. He felt like he belonged. The reception at the boarding house was a lively affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Margaret had outdone herself with the decorations, transforming the dining room into a festive space with more flowers and ribbons and candles. The women of the town had contributed dishes, creating a feast that groaned under the weight of fried chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. Pike endured the receiving line with as much grace as he could manage, shaking hands with miners he had guided through the desert, accepting congratulations from shopkeepers, and nodding politely at the women who told him how handsome he looked in his suit. All the while, he kept Willow close to his side, drawing strength from her presence. When it finally came time for the first dance, Pike led Willow to the center of the room with the same determination he brought to tracking game through difficult terrain. He was still terrible at dancing, but he had practiced enough to get through a waltz without causing injury, and Willow did not seem to mind when he stepped on her toes. "You are doing wonderfully," she murmured as they moved together. "I am counting steps in my head and praying I do not trip." She laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "Even if you do trip, I will catch you. I am twice your size. Then we will fall together." Pike pulled her closer, no longer caring about proper dance form or the people watching. "I love you, Mrs. Edwards. I love you too, Mr. Edwards." They danced until the sun set and the candles were lit, until other couples joined them and the floor became crowded, until Pike finally convinced Willow to escape with him to the porch where they could breathe and be alone for a moment. They stood together under the stars, Willow leaning against Pike's chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. The sounds of celebration continued inside, but out here it was quiet and peaceful. "Are you happy?" Willow asked softly. Pike thought about the question, really thought about it. A year ago, if someone had told him he would be standing here in a suit that itched, married to a woman he loved more than breathing, surrounded by a community he was part of, he would have laughed at the impossibility of it. His life had been solitary and simple, governed by the rhythms of nature and the need to survive. But now, his life was complex and messy and full of people and responsibilities and expectations. It was uncomfortable and challenging and nothing like what he had planned. And yes, he was happy. happier than he had ever been. "Yes," he said, kissing the top of Willow's head, "I am happy." They stayed at the boarding house that night in a room Margaret had prepared specially for them. It was their first night as husband and wife, and Pike approached it with the same mixture of nervousness and anticipation that he felt before any new experience. Willow was patient and gentle, guiding him through the intimacy they were discovering together. They were both new to this, fumbling and awkward at times, but there was love in every touch, trust in every kiss. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two people who had chosen each other completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. Pike traced patterns on Willow's bare shoulder, marveling at the softness of her skin, the way she fit perfectly against his side. "No regrets?" Willow asked, her voice sleepy and content. "Not a single one." The next morning, they left Superior for a week-long trip to Pike's mountain camp. It was part honeymoon, part introduction to the life Pike had lived before Willow. He wanted her to see where he had spent those solitary years, to understand the part of him that would always belong to the wilderness. They rode together on Pike's horse, Willow seated in front of him, his arms around her waist as he guided them through familiar terrain. He showed her the places that mattered to him, the creek where he had caught his first trout after arriving in Arizona, the cave where he had sheltered during a 3-day storm, the ridge where he had watched the sun rise every morning. Willow listened to his stories and added her own observations, pointing out birds he had never noticed, finding beauty in rock formations he had passed 1,000 times without really seeing. She made his wilderness feel new again, worth seeing through her eyes. At his camp, they lived simply, cooking over an open fire, sleeping under the stars, bathing in the creek. Pike taught Willow to set snares and skin rabbits, to read the signs that predicted weather changes, to move through the landscape without leaving traces. Willow proved herself to be a quick learner and uncomplaining companion, adapting to the primitive conditions without protest. On their 4th night in the mountains, as they lay together wrapped in blankets under a sky so full of stars, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet, Willow asked Pike about his childhood. He had avoided talking about it, preferring to leave the past buried where it belonged. But they were married now, bound together in ways that went beyond legal or physical. She deserved to know all of him, even the dark parts. "My father was not always violent," Pike began, his voice low and measured. "Before my mother died, he was different, stern but not cruel. He worked hard, provided for us, sometimes even laughed. But when she got sick and died, something broke in him. He started drinking, and when he drank, he got mean." Willow did not interrupt, just held his hand and waited for him to continue. "He would hit me for anything. Spilling milk, tracking mud into the house, looking at him wrong. I learned to stay out of his way as much as possible, but on a small farm, there was nowhere to hide for long. By the time I was 16, I was bigger than him, and I think he knew that soon I would fight back. Maybe that is why he got worse, trying to break me before I broke him." "But you left instead." "Yes. One morning I woke up and realized I had a choice. I could stay and become like him, twisted and angry and violent, or I could leave and find out if there was another way to live." Pike turned his head to look at Willow. "So I left. Took my mother's old coat and a knife and just started walking. Best decision I ever made." "Do you ever think about going back, confronting him?" Pike had considered it over the years, imagining scenarios where he returned as a grown man and demanded answers or apologies. But he had always dismissed the fantasies as pointless. "No, he does not deserve any more of my time or energy. The best revenge is the life I have built without him." Willow kissed his jaw softly. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for listening." They returned to Superior at the end of the week, tanned and refreshed and even more in love than before. Real life awaited them with all its demands and responsibilities, but they faced it together. Pike and Willow settled into their small house on the edge of town, turning it from a bachelor's sparse quarters into a real home. Willow added curtains to the windows and rugs to the floors. Pike built furniture, a proper bed frame, a kitchen table, chairs that did not wobble. Together, they planted a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn desert soil. Pike continued his work as a guide and hunter, building a reputation as the best tracker in the territory. Miners heading into dangerous areas hired him to lead them safely. Businessmen needing to transport valuables through the wilderness trusted him to protect their goods. The work was steady and paid well enough to support them comfortably. Willow continued working at the boarding house part-time, enjoying the camaraderie with Margaret and the other women who worked there. But she also began taking on sewing work, using the skills she had developed making Pike's wedding shirt to create clothing for others. Her reputation for quality work spread quickly, and soon she had more orders than she could fill. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They argued about money, with Pike wanting to save every penny and Willow believing in spending some to make their home comfortable. They argued about social obligations, with Willow wanting to accept every invitation and Pike needing more solitude than constant social events allowed. They argued about how much time Pike spent in the mountains, and whether Willow should always go with him or have her own independent life in town. But they learned to compromise. They established a household budget that satisfied both their needs. They accepted some social invitations and politely declined others. Pike took his mountain trips alone sometimes and brought Willow other times, and both learned to appreciate the balance. In the spring of 1880, Willow discovered she was pregnant. She told Pike one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, placing his hand on her still flat stomach and watching his face transform with wonder and fear. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Willow asked, suddenly nervous. They had talked about children in abstract terms, but the reality was different from the theory. Pike pulled her into his lap, cradling her carefully as if she had suddenly become fragile. "I am terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared, but yes, I am happy. So happy I do not have words for it." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Pike became even more protective than usual. He insisted Willow stop working at the boarding house, worried about her being on her feet too much. He refused to let her lift anything heavier than a teacup. He fretted over every little discomfort she experienced, convinced that something terrible was about to happen. Willow tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love and the fear of losing something precious. She reminded him gently that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was healthy and strong. But she also appreciated his concern and let him take care of her when he needed to feel useful. William was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He immediately began building a cradle in his spare time, crafting it from smooth wood and painting it with careful precision. Margaret threw Willow a party where the women of Superior gathered to offer advice, share stories, and provide gifts of baby clothes and blankets. As Willow's pregnancy advanced through the summer, Pike found himself thinking about fatherhood with increasing anxiety. What did he know about being a father? His only example had been a violent drunk. What if those tendencies lived inside him, dormant but waiting? What if he lost his temper and hurt his child? He shared these fears with Willow one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. "You are nothing like your father," Willow said firmly. "Nothing. You are gentle and patient and kind. You have never once raised your voice to me in anger, never been violent or cruel. Whatever legacy he gave you, it was not that. But what if it is inside me, waiting? Then we will deal with it together. But Pike, I have watched you with children in town. I have seen how gently you handle animals, how carefully you treat everything you care about. You are going to be a wonderful father." Pike wanted to believe her. He held onto her words like a lifeline, repeating them to himself whenever doubt crept in. Their daughter was born on a cold January evening in 1881, delivered by the town doctor with Margaret and William in attendance. Pike paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, listening to Willow's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. When Margaret finally emerged to tell him he had a daughter and both mother and baby were healthy, Pike nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the bedroom on shaky legs and found Willow propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your daughter," Willow said softly, holding the baby out to him. Pike approached like he was approaching a wild animal, terrified he would somehow break this fragile creature. But when Willow placed the baby in his arms, something fundamental shifted inside him. He looked down at the tiny face, the rosebud mouth, the impossibly small fingers curled into fists, and felt love so intense it was almost painful. "She is perfect," he whispered, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. "What should we name her?" Willow asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding his daughter, Pike thought about the strong women who had shaped his life. His mother, who had shown him kindness before she died. Willow, who had taught him to love. This tiny girl who already owned his heart completely. "Rose," he said. "Rose Catherine Edwards." Willow smiled. "Rose, it is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Pike in ways he never expected. The fierce protectiveness he felt for Willow intensified 100-fold for Rose. He became hyper-aware of every danger, real and imagined, that could threaten his daughter. The town suddenly seemed full of hazards, horses that might spook, sharp edges on buildings, strangers who might mean harm. But he also discovered a capacity for tenderness he never knew he possessed. He could spend hours just watching Rose sleep, marveling at the rise and fall of her tiny chest. He sang to her in his rough voice, old songs his mother had sung to him that he had not realized he remembered. He walked her around the house at night when she fussed, swaying back and forth in a rhythm that soothed them both. Willow watched her mountain man husband become a devoted father and fell even more deeply in love with him. She had known Pike was capable of gentleness, but seeing him with Rose revealed depths of tenderness that took her breath away. As Rose grew from infant to toddler, Pike taught her about the world with the same patience he had shown Willow. He took her on walks through the desert, pointing out lizards and birds and interesting rocks. He taught her the names of plants and how to listen to the wind. Rose absorbed everything with the wide-eyed wonder of childhood, and Pike discovered that seeing the world through his daughter's eyes made it new and magical again. When Rose was 2 years old, Willow became pregnant again. This time, Pike was less anxious and more excited. He knew what to expect, knew that he could handle fatherhood, knew that his capacity for love was far greater than his capacity for violence. Their son was born in the summer of 1883, a healthy baby boy with Pike's dark hair and Willow's green eyes. They named him Peter William Edwards, honoring William with the middle name. With 2 children, their small house felt cramped. So Pike built an addition, expanding their home to include 2 bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen. He worked on it in his spare time, with William helping when his freight business allowed. The physical labor felt good, satisfying in a way that reminded Pike of his early days in the mountains when survival had required constant effort and skill. The years passed in a blur of children's laughter, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and slow dances in the kitchen when the children were asleep. Pike and Willow's love deepened and matured, weathering the storms of daily life and emerging stronger. Rose grew into an adventurous child who followed her father everywhere, begging to go on his mountain trips and learning to track and hunt alongside him. Peter was quieter, preferring books and drawing, showing an artistic talent that surprised them both. Pike loved them equally and differently, adapting his parenting to each child's unique personality. In 1885, when Rose was 4 and Peter was 2, Willow became pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, with Willow experiencing more sickness and fatigue. Pike worried constantly, but Willow remained optimistic, insisting that she was fine and the baby was healthy. Their third child, a daughter they named Patricia Margaret Edwards, was born in early 1886. She came into the world screaming with indignation, and from her first breath, it was clear she had inherited her father's stubbornness and her mother's determination. With 3 children, life was chaotic and messy and wonderful. The house was always full of noise and activity, a far cry from the silent mountains where Pike had spent so many years alone. Some days, he missed the quiet, the simplicity of a life governed only by survival. But then Rose would climb into his lap and ask him to tell her about the time he tracked a mountain lion through a snowstorm, or Peter would show him a drawing he had made, or Patricia would grab his finger with her tiny hand and smile, and Pike would not trade this noisy, complicated life for anything. William thrived as a grandfather, spending as much time with his grandchildren as his business allowed. He taught Rose to read and Peter to appreciate numbers and patterns. He spoiled all 3 children shamelessly, much to Willow's amused exasperation. Margaret remained a close friend to both Pike and Willow, eventually remarrying to a schoolteacher who came to Superior in 1884. Her wedding was smaller than Pike and Willow's had been, but no less joyful, and Pike stood up for her husband the way William had stood up for him. As the children grew older, Pike made sure they understood both sides of their heritage, the civilized world of the town and the wild world of the mountains. He took them on camping trips, teaching them survival skills and respect for nature. Willow taught them to read and write, to be kind and generous, to stand up for what was right. Rose, at 8 years old, could track a deer through rocky terrain and recite poetry from memory. Peter, at 6, could identify edible plants and solve complex arithmetic problems. Patricia, at 4, could outsmart most adults and charm her way out of any trouble. In 1890, when Pike was 44 years old, he took a long look at his life and marveled at how far he had come from that angry, 17-year-old boy who had fled his father's farm. He had a wife he loved more with each passing year, 3 healthy children who filled his days with purpose and joy, a home that was truly a home, and a community where he belonged. The mountains still called to him sometimes, and he still took trips to his old camp, sometimes alone and sometimes with Rose or one of the other children. But those trips were no longer about running away or hiding from the world. They were about remembering where he came from and appreciating where he had ended up. One evening, as he and Willow sat on their porch watching the sun set behind the Superstition Mountains, the same view they had watched together for over a decade, Willow took his hand and said, "Do you remember our wedding day?" Pike laughed. "How could I forget? That suit nearly killed me. You looked so uncomfortable, standing at that altar, sweating in that wool suit that itched." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But you also looked like the most handsome man I had ever seen. I would wear that suit every day for the rest of my life if it meant keeping you." "Let us not go that far. I prefer you in buckskin anyway." Pike kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Willow Edwards." "I love you too, Pike Edwards." From inside the house, they heard the sound of their children playing, Rose's voice directing some elaborate game, Peter's quieter contribution, Patricia's demands to be included. The sounds of home, of family, of a life built on love and trust and the courage to be vulnerable. Pike had worn buckskin every day of his life before Willow, armor against a world that had hurt him, a symbol of his chosen solitude. But standing at that altar in a suit that itched, he had shed more than comfortable clothes. He had shed his fear of connection, his belief that he was better off alone, his conviction that love was more dangerous than any wild animal. And in return, he had gained everything. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Rose grew into a strong young woman who eventually married a surveyor and moved to Tucson, but visited often with her own children. Peter discovered a talent for engineering and helped improve the mining operations in Superior, making them safer and more efficient. Patricia became a teacher, educating the next generation of children in the expanding town. Pike and Willow grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly, but their love remaining constant. They watched Superior transform from a rough mining camp into an established town with real streets and permanent buildings. They saw the territory change and grow, witnessed the slow march of progress that brought both benefits and losses. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor and adventure, the calm center and the exciting possibility. They had built something lasting, a family legacy that would continue long after they were gone. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. The party was held at Rose's house in Tucson, a large gathering of family that filled the rooms with laughter and love. Pike, now 63 years old, stood with Willow, now 55, and looked around at the fruits of their union, 3 children, all healthy and happy and successful in their own ways. 7 grandchildren, ranging from teenagers to toddlers, all carrying pieces of Pike and Willow in their faces and personalities. Friends and extended family, a community built over decades of showing up and caring and being present. "Not bad for a mountain man and the woman he pulled out of the desert," Pike said quietly to Willow. She squeezed his hand. "Not bad at all." That night, after the party had ended and they were alone in the guest room Rose had prepared for them, Pike held Willow close and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting in the desert, when she had been half dead and he had been half alive, to this moment where they were both fully, completely, vibrantly alive. "Do you have any regrets?" Willow asked, echoing the question she had asked on their wedding night 3 decades earlier. Pike considered it carefully, as he always did with important questions. He thought about the mountains he no longer explored as often, the solitary life he had given up, the freedom he had traded for responsibility. "Not a single one," he said. The same answer he had given then, and meant it even more now. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. Pike Edwards had worn buckskin every day of his life until the day he stood at the altar in a suit that itched. And in that moment of discomfort and vulnerability, surrounded by people instead of mountains, bound by promises instead of freedom, he had found his true home. Not in a place, but in a person. Not in solitude, but in connection. Not in running away, but in choosing to stay. and that made all the itching worth it.